G'day, g'day, and welcome to Tartarian Truthers with your hosts, Casey and JoJo. Now, before we get started with this week's episode of Tartarian Truthers, we'd like to say some thank yous. So, first up, a massive shout out to my baby cousin, JoJo from Melbourne, for providing our intro theme music. Her song is called Fun and Games, which is such a great track. And if you want to check it out on Spotify, please do. We love it so much. And also a massive, massive thank you to Casey's daughter, Riley, aka Shae Design, for designing our logo and other bits and pieces. I mean, she has been like our technical support from day one, hasn't she, Casey?
She has. She's so good. And we love our logo.
We love it. And it's us looking up.
That's right. It's what we do best, as well as looking down for the mud flutters.
That's right.
But yeah, we do love our logo and our theme music. So thanks so much to Joe and Riles. Please check them out at JoJo Doon for Lil JoJo and for Riley at Hey Shae Design. But we also need to thank Judd from Ditch World on Instagram. He is a big fan of Tartarian Truthers, and he reached out and gave us a hand with some annoying sound issues that we've been dealing with on and off for months. So thank you so much, mate. You are a legend.
You sure are, Judd. Thank you so much for helping us out. And I hope our sound issues are resolved.
I think so. Thanks,
okay.
Judd.
I know. Thanks, Judd. And lastly, a big thank you to all of our subscribers. We couldn't believe that we hit 10K just last week. We honestly started this as a bit of fun, not expecting to generate so much interest. So it has been absolutely mind-blowing watching our subs grow each week and to read all of your comments and feedback. Thank you all so, so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. We really appreciate all of your support. And love reading all of your comments. Even though we don't always get to respond to all of them, we try to read as many of them as we can.
We sure do.
Okay, so now let's move on to today's episode. And as we explained last week during our little sneak peek, we are going to be exploring the great Aussie gold rush of the 1850s. But to put things into perspective, this gold rush wasn't only in Australia, it was actually worldwide. So a gold rush or gold fever is a discovery of gold, sometimes accompanied by other precious metals and rare earth minerals. That brings an onrush of miners seeking their fortune. Major gold rushes took place in the 19th century in Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, South Africa, the United States, and Canada, while smaller gold rushes took place elsewhere. So, quite coincidental, wouldn't you say, that this happened all over the world in the exact same time frame. But as we know, JoJo, there are no such things as coincidences. So let's have a look at some of the other stuff that was happening around the world back in the 1850s. So we got this information from a website called Kids News, which is brought to you by News Corp Australia, which is the multinational mass media corporation operated and owned by media mogul Rupert Murdoch. So the indoctrination starts young, right? But it does have some interesting facts on it.
Yes, it does. Okay. The beginning of the Australian gold rush in 1851 was a time of huge change around the world. There were wars and revolutions, amazing inventions, and mass migration as people travelled around the world to seek a better life. Victoria was the Queen of the UK and of Australia from 1836 until she died in 1901. Now, the Public Libraries Act was passed by British Parliament in 1850, giving many British people the chance to read books and learn about the rest of the world for the first time.
Wait, what? So before this Public Libraries Act was passed in 1850, the average person didn't have any access to books and had no idea what was happening in other parts of the world. That's interesting, right? Because then all of a sudden in 1850, libraries became a thing. And people all of a sudden had access to books that were provided to them to borrow for free from the government. What do you think, JoJo? I think it smells like the library was just another way for them to indoctrinate people with their history.
I think you might be right, Casey. We know how much they like to hide things in plain sight, huh? Let's keep going, shall we? Steam was beginning to be used to power ships rather than just sails and the wind, making travel times to far off lands faster and more predictable. The Great Exhibition took place in London in 1851 to show off the world's new inventions, including the first public toilets and other mass-produced things made possible by the Industrial Revolution. It was held in the extraordinary Crystal Palace, and 6 million people visited.
Wow, okay, so we have one of the biggest exhibitions in the world in a magnificent Crystal Palace. And News Corp just want the kids to really focus on the invention of public toilets and supposed mass-produced products. Wow, way to totally distract them from actually thinking critically about what this exhibition and the incredible building may have really been for, hey?
Yep, it's another perfect example of media doing what they do best, hey? Okay, so at New York's World Fair in 1854, Elisha Graves Otis showed off his new invention, the safety elevator with a brake to stop the lift falling if it fails. Tall buildings instantly became more practical.
Interesting point there, JoJo. I wonder if that was yet another convenient cover story for the plethora of huge buildings already in New York City at that time. Moving on.
Many people became sick and died in London in 1854 from an outbreak of cholera, and John Snow discovered it was passed through the water supply.
And lo and behold, that's when the germ theory was invented. But let's not go down that rabbit hole today. But just another coincidence that happened in the 1850s. You know nothing, Jon Snow. All right, let's go back to the list.
The Crimean War was fought between many European countries from 1853 to 1856.
Okay, so admittedly, I didn't know much about the Crimean War, JoJo, so I thought I'd look it up, do a bit of research, and I came across this damning article and photograph. Seriously, it's crazy. Check it out. So, the birth of propaganda, how Queen Victoria and Emperor Napoleon III used new invention of photography to show how UK and France were united in Crimean War against the Russians. One of the world's first propaganda photographs featuring Queen Victoria in 1855 has emerged. The incredibly rare picture shows the monarch alongside Emperor Napoleon III at Crystal Palace in London. It was taken as a show of strength when the British and French were fighting the Russians in the Crimean War. So, I mean, not only is it blatantly saying that the monarch used propaganda as a technique to sway public opinion, but they're also sitting on stage at the Crystal Palace at the Great Exhibition. I mean, Napoleon and the Queen chilling together. What was really going on back then? It's so very, very interesting, JoJo. But of course, the monarch and the media don't do things like this anymore, right? Like, that was probably just a one-off.
Just a one-off. No, absolutely not, Casey. They would never do that. Okay, the last point here is Charles Darwin published his book on the origin of the species, which explained his theory of evolution.
So, yet another theory from a known high-ranking Freemason was taken and taught to the world as the truth. And we have to believe it because it's science, right? We evolved from monkeys. Yep. Okay.
Wow. The 1850s were rife with indoctrination. It almost seems like it may have been the beginning of a new world order. What do you think, Casey?
It sure seems that way, doesn't it, JoJo? Because at exactly the same time, gold rushes were implemented all over the world, even here in Australia. But it's documented that people had been finding gold for at least 70 years prior to this in Australia. But the government didn't want it to be known, and people were actually buying and selling it in secret.
But then, in May of 1851, Edward Hargraves apparently discovered Australia's first load of payable gold. But if you watched our sneak peek last week, you would have learned that he actually gypped 3 other men out of their gold and claimed it as his own. And from doing some further research into Hargraves, what did we discover, Casey?
So it's not widely discussed, as in he isn't on any of our lists of famous Aussie Masons, but we found this sentence on the Australian Dictionary of Biography website showing that he was actually a Freemason. So it matches up very well with the reference to the number 33 that we mentioned in our sneak peek. So he was a Mason who dudded the others out of their gold, instigated the gold rush in Australia, and when it was going to be found out that he was a fraud, one of the men mysteriously died before he could give evidence.
Edward Hargraves had farmed sheep near Bathurst, harvested sea cucumbers in the Torres Strait, and worked as a sailor, publican, shopkeeper, and steamship agent, all by the age of 33. In 1890, a New South Wales Legislative Council inquiry found that Lister and the Toms were undoubtedly the first discoverers of payable gold in Australia. But Lister didn't get to enjoy his victory, having dropped dead on the day he was due to give evidence.
That seems pretty sus. But it gets even more interesting, Casey. Let's head down to Victoria, shall we?
Yes, let's. To Bendigo, in fact, an infamous gold mining town that has some of the most fascinating architecture in Australia and an interesting history when it comes to public historical figures. So, Christopher Bollesteed, I think that's how you say it, was a German who came to the Bendigo goldfields in 1854. According to the history books, he seems like a nice man. He had a wife and a son and was the first man to sink mine shafts deep into the ground to get the deposits further down. He made a mozza out of it too, but quite suddenly he died. And so the official narrative goes that within 2 years of his death, his wife and son sold all of Bollesteed's assets to George Lancel and moved back to Germany. So it says here, sorry, if we just go back to that last image, JoJo, Mr. Bollesteed, although upwards of 70 years of age, was active and energetic and in the enjoyment of excellent health until he was struck down by an attack of paralysis, which proved fatal. So, and then within another 2 years of that, his son had died too. Now, I'm not sure how he died. We couldn't find that information. But then Lancel became the richest man in town, a millionaire who continued to mine from Bollesteed's mine for many more years. I mean, it may have had something to do with the obelisks that he had at his mine sites. Who knows? But remember, he was also a Mason with a very interesting family crest, as seen here on his crockery.
When you know, you know. But that all seems so suspicious, doesn't it, Casey? I mean, the richest mine owner in town who is fit and healthy dies suddenly from an attack of paralysis. What even was that? Could it have been poison, maybe? And then within 2 years, his widow sells all their assets to a prominent Mason and returns to her home country with her only son, where within another 2 years, he dies too? Heartbreaking. But why in the world would you sell a mine that was still capable of producing millions of dollars for its owner for many years to come? I think there might have been a bit more going on behind the scenes in Bendigo than the history books allow.
Exactly, Jojo. I mean, Lancel even got the man's mansion in the deal. The Villa Fortuna, which still stands today, I mean, look at it. 40 rooms it has. And would you look at that tech on the roof? What is that? It's still there today. So if anyone is in Bendigo and knows what this is on top of the Villa Fortuna, please leave us a comment. We would love to know.
And now check out the interior and the gardens that surrounded it. It's incredible. This man lived in absolute opulence, didn't he? So much stuff. And those statues, look at them. They're so stunning. I wonder where he got them from.
According to the official narrative, they say he got them shipped to him from all over the world. But who knows, Jojo? They could have been dug up after a mud flood for all we know. So many questions.
So many questions. And is that a portrait of Charles Darwin?
It would not surprise me at all.
So, Casey, it's a bit of a myth that the goldfields were only full of men, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, because the goldfields were also a place that entire families emigrated to. So there were not only women, but also children too. They say by 1852, there were at least 12,000 children on the goldfields. There were even schools set up for them, but the teachers were not of a high quality.
Wait. Is that Greta?
What?
I just spotted
I
that.
think it
I'm
is,
sure you
it's
noticed it too. Oh, gosh.
Oh my
Hang on.
goodness.
Sorry, just noticed
You're
that.
right. So there were even schools set up for them, but the teachers were of a high quality and most children did not get much of an education whilst living on the goldfields. Most of them had to actually help their parents working on the fields.
Yeah, you know what? This image really gives me the creeps, especially because it says youthful goldfields residents.
Yeah, I agree. And that child in the middle is dressed so inappropriately for that era. That's just not right.
Mm-mm. Okay, let's head over to WA now on the Kalgoorlie mines. Even though we could talk for hours on Victoria and its gold rush towns, we didn't even get to talk on Ballarat. But we actually think that Ballarat deserves an entire episode to itself. Maybe even an on-location episode when Casey hits the road in the new year.
Yes, I'm down for that. So
Yes, fantastic. So get in touch if you are in Ballarat and have some local historic goss for us. Please let us know. We would love to hear from you.
Yes.
So Kalgoorlie is 600 kilometres east of Perth, is famous for the golden mile that sparked the greatest gold rush that Australia has ever seen. The Kalgoorlie Gold Rush is largely credited for spiking Western Australia's population from a meagre 49,000 in 1891 to a whopping 184,000 in just 10 years.
And the story of how it was found is just so absurd to me, Jojo. I mean, two guys just walking around in the absolute middle of nowhere in 1893 just happened to find gold laying around on the ground. I mean, let's take a look at where Kalgoorlie is and what the area around it is like. Okay, so this is Australia, and as you can see, it looks like it has been absolutely annihilated at some point in time. I mean, literally carpet bombed, right? Devastated by some kind of cataclysmic event, perhaps. Anyway, in amongst all this red, dusty desert is the town of Kalgoorlie, the middle of nowhere. There wasn't even anything there at all, they say. So, what were two guys doing out there in the first place? Let's just have a look now at the absolute desertion around it. I mean, it's just red dust as far as the eye can see.
It's pretty vast, isn't it? Just so dry and arid.
Okay, so let's have a look how far away it is from Perth, which is the capital city of Western Australia, out to Kalgoorlie.
So as you can see from this map, today driving in a car, it takes almost 7 hours to get there. And they say that back then it took 5 weeks on horseback. Plus, it was in the middle of a literal desert. So there was no water supply. So what they did was lay a huge pipeline from Mundaring Weir to Kalgoorlie and pumped fresh water there. But they actually had to construct the weir too first. Can you imagine? Now, the same guy that orchestrated the engineering feat of the 568-kilometre pipeline in 1898 was also the same guy that engineered the Fremantle Harbour, which opened in 1892. So much going on, right? And with a population of less than 200,000 in the entire state of Western Australia in 1901, who was doing all this construction? And who was out there finding all the gold?
Exactly, JoJo. But now back to this amazing engineer, Charles Yelverton O'Connor, who is responsible for both the harbour and the pipeline. Both of these were said to have been thought impossible in the time period, and apparently he copped a lot of flack for it by the media and in Parliament. And this must have really gotten to him because he sadly committed suicide in March of 1902 by shooting himself as he rode his horse into the water. But did he really do that though? I mean, why would a man who would go down in history for achieving two of the most incredible engineering feats in the world at the time shoot himself before the pipeline was even completed? Now, we're obviously not the only people who find this story to be dubious, because we found an article on ABC Local, and an education officer by the name of Diana Freilink and a professor, Martin Webb, both agree that it seems suspicious. So his latest biographer says he was bipolar and had manic depression and killed himself in a state of depression. But what is definitely not true is that he killed himself because the pipeline failed. That's what everyone believes. But it says on the next slide that there's been recent questions over whether O'Connor's suicide note was in fact a suicide note at all. So Professor Martin Webb, who has written about the strange suicide of C.Y. O'Connor about a year ago, he re-examined what we call the suicide note and whether we should actually look at it in a new light. Is it actually a suicide note? And what he said was that suicide note actually says something along the lines of, the Coolgardie scheme is all right and I could finish it if I got a chance. It sounds like he did believe in the scheme. And also, Diana said that he died whilst out riding, an activity he usually did with his daughter Bridget, who was unavailable on that particular day. Just by chance, she was unable to go that day. So it doesn't look like it was a planned thing. So Diana obviously has an invested interest in this because she was actually doing a lecture on his death at the WA Museum in Kalgoorlie, Boulder. And that was back in, I think, 2014 was this article from JoJo?
Yep,
Yeah.
2014, yep.
So
Wow.
it all seems very questionable, doesn't it?
I mean, it sure does. And do you want to know what the creepiest thing about his death is, Casey?
What's that?
Oh, look at this. It's this monument. Look at this. Like, how creepy. And if you go to the Heritage Council for the Government of Western Australia, it literally says that they are commemorating his suicide. I don't know what you think about this, guys, but I think it's a sick way to commemorate someone who took their own life by shooting themselves as they rode their horse into the water.
I agree, JoJo. It's sick, especially when there's evidence to say that this suicide may not have been a suicide at all. So much symbolism in this monument. Even more so considering this statue didn't actually go in until 1999, almost 100 years after his death. But I think there may be other people that feel the same way we do, because in 2018, it was actually vandalized and someone cut the body off the statue. A huge bronze statue, 30 meters offshore, by the way. So it was obviously a well thought out plan of attack. And as far as we're aware, it's still a mystery who did it.
So interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now back to Kalgoorlie. This town is in the middle of nowhere, found by two men just strolling around in the desert, and then boom, all of a sudden a town goes up and there are people everywhere. I mean, look at some of this architecture. It's quite old world looking, isn't it? And look at the mining area now. Oh my gosh, this is absolutely heartbreaking to see this. This land has absolutely been raped and pillaged but then it's celebrated. And they encourage tourism, so people go there to look at gaping big holes in the ground that have made rich people even richer than we could possibly fathom. And you know what? It should be illegal to exploit our land like this. It really should.
Agreed. It's shocking to actually see the scale of it. It's awful.
Okay, so let's go back and take a look at this, at these old world buildings. So if we go back and look at some of the buildings in Bathurst and Bendigo, the other two gold rush towns that we touched on in this episode, they too have remarkable architecture. And we've always been told that it was built from all the money that the gold rush brought into the towns. And we've always just believed that narrative, right? Because our grandparents and their parents were told the same stories too.
That's right. We were told people came from all over the world to try and strike it rich. But did they? Or were the people already here? And the gold rush, is that just the cover story? Or was the population really this small and the powers that be orchestrated the gold rushes to drive up the population? But even that theory I find hard to believe, JoJo, because back in this time period, shipping hundreds of thousands of people back and forth all over the world would have been virtually impossible and incredibly costly for the average person. Thanks to this comment by Lance Duke on our Gold Rush sneak peek video from last week, because he really broke it down for us. He said, so in 20 years, over 1 million people came to Australia, say on average of 50,000 people arriving each year. Each sailing ship would carry on average 150 passengers. That would require over 330 individual ships per year arriving in Australia. Where did the people get the money to afford such a journey? And where did the abundance of ships to transport them come from? Transporting 35,000 a year would still require 235 trips for 150 people. The narrative gets even more absurd.
Gosh, I love our followers and I love comments like this where they break it down for us. It's amazing.
It is. So thanks, Lance.
Thank you.
So we really don't know what happened back then. But don't you think that it's quite coincidental that Kalgoorlie, one of the biggest gold mines in the world, was found quite by mistake over 100 years ago, but is still producing gold and billions of dollars in revenue for its owners today?
Did someone or something already know where these resources could be found? Were people actually already living in these places and mining there before the gold rush was called into play? Or were these places rediscovered after being lost or unpopulated for many years prior during some kind of cataclysmic event?
So many questions that we certainly can't answer, but we hope that it has got you all thinking, because as we are, we hope you too are starting to realize more and more every day that history is a pack of lies about events that never happened, told by people who weren't there.
It sure seems that way, doesn't it?
It sure does, JoJo. And yeah, that's a wrap for this episode. It was a bit of a longer one this week, but thank you all so much for watching. We appreciate you commenting every week and sharing your thoughts and all your love. So until next time, adios.
See you later. Bye, everyone.
Bye.